Good morning. Today is Tuesday, the fourth day of Adar, and we are in the middle of chapter 30 in the Tanya. And chapter 30 is talking about the way to bring the Beinani to snap out of his numbness, of his spiritual numbness. And in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe says that is basically one of the ways of doing it is by crushing down the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination within us, and getting to the point of understanding that we are not as perfect as we think. And he says you got to compare yourself to others and realize that those people that you think are much lower than you really are not. Really, you're just like them and perhaps even lower than them. Look at yourself and see how you are really lower than those people who you thought are much lower than you based on the level of observance, based on their morality, and so on and so forth. I was actually asked yesterday a question. Isn't that something that was going to really crush our self-esteem if we think ourselves so low? And the answer is that that's the idea. No, we don't mean that we should lower, you shouldn't have a healthy self-esteem. That's, of course, is a good thing. But the idea is that you have to crush the bad side of you and really to identify with your pure and good side. So when you're crushing down on the Yetzer Hara and the evil inclination and the evil side within you and the animal soul within you, you're not really crushing yourself, meaning the self-esteem is healthy, but it has to be focused on the right self, the true self. And that is the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul. And the animal soul, as we learned yesterday, 2 days ago, that sometimes we have to scream at the Yetzer Hara and you have to tell them, what are you doing? You're nothing. You have no substance whatsoever. You're just trying to obstruct the view, the godly view that I have. In any case, so back to this chapter, so the Alter Rebbe is saying you have to be humble, comparing yourself to others. Those people that are, you call them kal shebekalim, those people are really careless about observing anything. And even the kalim call them kalim, even the simple people call them so, that they're so careless and they're so low. Nevertheless, says the Alter Rebbe, think about the struggle that they have and think about yourself. Are you doing what you're doing with so much effort and struggle like they do? The test and the challenges that they have, do you have the same challenge? So this is the Alter Rebbe is continuing now on this line that you should really examine yourself and give yourself a really honest examination and realize where is there places that you can fix, and realizing that you are really not as perfect as you think. That will break the spirit of the animal soul and will allow once again the godly soul to shine. So let's look inside. Says the Alter Rebbe, "Chol shelo yegia lidei midos zu leilochem im gufoi milchama atzuma kazoi." Anyone who has not attained this standard of waging such a strenuous war against his body, adayin lo yegia lebchinas ve'erech milchemes hayetzer aboya keish la'ara, has not yet measured up to the quality and dimensions of the war waged daily within the Kal Shebekalim, those people who are so lower and a low level, they do have that struggle because their Yetzer Hara, their evil nature, is burning by them like a fiery flame. So that this powerful evil impulse be humbled and broken through the fear of God. And you, the Alter Rebbe is talking to the Beinani, you don't have that struggle. You don't fight that kind of war. And the same thing is true also, says the Alter Rebbe, think about your davening. Think about your doing things like saying Birkat Hamazon, saying the blessing on the food and the blessing on the mitzvahs, think with a bracha before you eat. Do you really put your mind and your effort in saying this properly, the way it is expected from a person on your level? Says the Alter Rebbe, "V'chein be'inyan birkas hamazon," so too with one's kavana in the grace after meal. V'chol birchis hanenin, and in all the blessings that we say prior to eating or anything we enjoy. Mitzvahs, and before we do a mitzvah, we say a bracha, the kavana, with a proper kavana, proper intention. And to do all this, it's not easy. It takes struggle to focus constantly, every day, benching. Sometimes we get so used to benching, we say it, but we don't focus properly. So that is also something that is required. So too, says the Alter Rebbe, you Mr. Beinani, you're Mr. Perfect. We would think yes, indeed, you are doing everything right. You're not violating any Torah and any mitzvah, any commandments, and you study Torah. But, says the Alter Rebbe, and when you study the Torah, do you really put the effort to study more than what you are used to do? Or you're just doing whatever you used to do every day? I'm doing it. Going the extra mile. That's the war. That's the fight. Says the Alter Rebbe, so too regarding the learning of the Torah, lilmoid arba yoser mecheftzei v'ratzainai lefitivai, to learn much more than, to study much more than what is demanded by his nature or a custom desire. By means of a mighty battle with his body. To learn what he's learning every day, he's already used to. But to learn more, that takes a battle with your body. Because to study a fraction more than one's want entails a small war, a minor battle. And you cannot compare this with the war that simple person, the Kal Shebekalim, is waging against his Yetzer Hara, against his evil inclination, who his evil side is burning like a fire. The mikre Rasha Gomer menatziach yitzra li es nichna mipnei v'nishba mipnei Hashem, for which he is nonetheless called the utterly wicked, Rasha Gomer, if he does not conquer his impulse. In other words, Alter Rebbe goes back saying that person who is on a low level does not have an excuse. The fact that he has a strong Yetzer Hara it's not an excuse for him not to overcome his Yetzer Hara, because he still has to do it. And if he doesn't do it, it's still called a Rasha. He has to go overcome his Yetzer Hara, so that he's subdued and crushed before God. So here says the Alter Rebbe, the same thing the Beinoni. You think you're not better than that person who you think is much lower than you, but the truth is, he's not. You're not fighting your wars. It's easy to fight to fight somebody else's temptations, because that's not my temptation. That's not my challenge. You got to see what is your challenge. And if the Beinoni would say, "Wait a second, how can I compare what he's doing to what I am doing?" A Beinoni could say, well, I'm not violating any mitzvah. Yes, maybe in some of the mitzvahs that I'm supposed to do better. But I'm not doing things which is not allowed to do. Says the Alter Rebbe, it makes no difference when it comes to follow the words of God. It makes no difference whether the commandment is don't do, or whether the commandment is do this. Whether the commandment is don't eat non-kosher, or whether the commandment is study Torah, put on tefillin, give charity. It makes no difference. If it's commandment of Hashem and you're not doing it to the fullest, then there is a problem. That's what it says. Umali b'chinas sumeira, umali b'chinas v'asei tov. What difference is there between the category of turn away from evil, in which the kal shebekalim, the lowest of the low, fails by active violation, and the category of do good, in which he fails by neglecting to exert himself in prayer, Torah study, and the like. There's no difference if you think about it. Why? Because everything is God's commandment. Both are the commandments of the Holy King, the Holy One, and unique one, blessed be He. So, again, Alter Rebbe says, look, you're not doing those mitzvahs with such a struggle, such effort that is demanded from the low person. The same thing also brings another example. B'sha'ar mitzvahs, other mitzvahs. Look at the other mitzvahs. Are you putting the effort? Do you put the fight with your evil inclination in order to fulfill the other mitzvahs in a perfect way? For example, especially in matters involving money, such as service of charity and the like. That when it comes to tzedakah, that is also a fight to give more than what you want to give. And also, even when we're talking about the level, until now we said that you compare yourself, I'm doing only positive mitzvahs, I'm not struggling. But in negative mitzvahs, prohibition, I am perfect. Says the Alter Rebbe, that also is not true. Even in things that are prohibitions, sumeira, in the category of turn away from evil, yochel kol ish maskil limtzoi nafshoy she'einoi so legamrei bakol me'ara bakol mikol kol. You can find, even by sumeira, even by the turn away from evil, you can find that you're not doing it perfectly. You're not really turning completely and totally away from the evil. For example, it says, when in places where it requires a battle of the level it mentioned earlier, even things that requires a smaller battle, not such a big battle, you still are not doing it the perfect way. For example, he says, for example, he says, to stop in the middle of a pleasant gossip. You just talk, not forbidden things, but you just You just talk, idle talk. And you enjoy the conversation, then you realize, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't be just talking idle talk, that things that has no result, doesn't do any good. Or, for example, or in the middle of relating a tale, discrediting his fellow. Sometimes we have to save our own face, but we do it on the account of somebody else. Says the Alter Rebbe, even if it is a very slight slur, and even if it is the afshu emes, even if it is true, even though it is his purpose in relating it is to exonerate himself. And Alter Rebbe brings an example of what it says in the Gemara, a story of the Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Rabbi that with his son, Rabbi Shimon. So what's the story? The story goes there was, they were writing a bill of divorce, and the get was, it's called a get mekusher, was a get that was tied. This is a special get they give for Cohens. Back then, that a Cohen, because a Cohen, they say Cohens are a little hasty. It says, and also a Cohen, if he divorces, unlike anybody else, like if he changes his mind, he can remarry. A Cohen cannot remarry. So what they did, they would write the get, the divorce, they would write each line, and they would fold the paper and sew it, and then they would go again and again. And that's how, in order to delay it and to make it more difficult to give the get. And Rabbi Yehuda came in and saw this get. He says, "Where's the date on the get?" So they told him, they untied it. They showed him the date, and so he didn't like it, and he wasn't happy with this kind of get. And his son told him, "I didn't write it. Rabbi Yehuda Chator wrote it." So immediately that his father told him, "Klach lechav lashon hara." Stop saying lashon hara. And the Alter Rebbe says, this is he didn't really say something bad. He just wanted just to make sure, it wasn't really something really terrible. But even though it wasn't such a terrible thing, that all he could have said, his father was upset, he could say, "I didn't write it." You don't have to say who wrote it. So this is again to talk about somebody else just to save, to exonerate yourself. That is also sometimes is not careful. The Beiran is not careful. That's what it says. Rabbi Shimon Rabbeinu HaKadosh. It is known what Rabbi Shimon said to his father, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who was Rabbi Yehuda. It says, "Lava no kasvei." I did not write it. Ele Yehuda Chayota kasvei. Yehuda the tailor wrote it. And his father told him, "Kalech meloshen hara." Keep away from slander. The Rebbe says, "Ayin shom beGemara." Look there in the Gemara, Reish Perek Yudah Bava Basra. Note there in the Gemara, the tractate Bava Basra, beginning of chapter 10. So in that it says, look in that Gemara. In that Gemara, it says another story with the same Rabbi Yehuda and his son. When they were writing, there was a nice again a piece of parchment, something that was nice, very beautiful writing, and Rabbi Yehuda gave a compliment and said, "Wow, this is beautiful writing." And his son, Rabbi Shimon, said to his father, "I didn't write it. Yehuda Chayota Kasvei. Yehuda the tailor wrote it." And there again, his father told him, "Stop saying lashon hara." So the question is, well, why is that lashon hara? Why is that so bad? If it's just saying a good thing, you're giving a compliment about the writing. So what's the problem there? The problem is that when he's telling his father about that who was the writing, it's like reminding him, you see the writing, the beautiful handwriting? Isn't that the same handwriting as the previous story? So that reminds him of the previous story, which wasn't so good. So that itself also is a bordering lashon hara, which is evil talk. Okay, I gavne. And says the Alter Rebbe, same thing. You got to focus on yourself and see there is so many things that you are not perfect. Okay, gavne kama mille de shchicha tuve. The same applies to very many similar things which occur frequently. Ubefrat, and especially beinyan lekadesh atzme b'mutaloi. Especially when we're talking about sanctifying oneself in permitted matters, meaning there are certain things, as we learned earlier in the Tanya, that not everything that is kosher means that you should eat. Not everything which is okay means you should do. You should also sanctify yourself even with permitted matters. It is a biblical commandment. As it says, it says in the verse, you shall be holy. And sanctify yourself. So there again, Mr. Bainani, think, are you really sanctifying yourself with the permitted matters as you're supposed to? And even if you're talking about, let's say, biblical commandments, you are fulfilling. What about the rabbinical commandments? Rabbinical enactments are even stricter than biblical law. However, it says all of these things and similar things, those are transgressions that a person, the things which people trample underfoot. And you became so used to do those things, you don't even realize that there's a problem with them. In which they also became regarded as permissible because they're committed repeatedly. When you commit something repeatedly, the person tends to think, okay, maybe it's okay, it's not so bad. So all of this until now, the Alter Rebbe says, you have to realize, so you see, you're not better than the other person, that he has his struggle. To him, for the person, the lowest of the low, for him to put on tefillin is a real challenge. And it's a difficult challenge. For him not to look at something which is not supposed to is a big challenge. Are you really fighting, struggling like he does? But finally, the Alter Rebbe goes the punchline and says, really, you're even worse than them. Why? Because you know better. A person who is not knowledgeable, is not studious, is not aware with Torah and aware of the closeness of Hashem, then for him, violating things is not as severe as for you not giving your effort the way for you should know better, so you should be, there's more expectation of you. That's what he says now. The truth is, if he knows, if he's a scholar who upholds God's Torah and wishes to be close to God, his sin is unbearably great. The guilt is increased manifold. In a manner that is not for he's not waging war and not overcoming his impulse in the same manner of waging war with such a strong war that we mentioned earlier, and his guilt is far greater than the guilt of the kal shebekalim, the lowest of the low, the most worthless of the street corner, that they are far from Hashem and the Torah. ואין אשמתם גדולה כל כך במה שאינם קושרים יצרם הבוער כאש להבה מפני פחד השם המבין ומעבד לכל מעשיהם. Their guilt is not so great in the fact that they do not conquer their evil inclination that burns like a fire, and they don't realize, they don't fight it because of the fear of Hashem that looks and sees all the deeds. Is the guilt of one who draws over nearer to Hashem, is Torah and his service. As our sages tell us regarding Acher. Acher is Elisha ben Avuya. They say about him that his transgressions is considered worse. Why? Because he knew my glory, and nevertheless he sinned, so that's why it's worse. This is why our sages say al ame ya'oretz regarding the illiterate people, the deliberate sins are regarded in their case as inadvertent acts because they don't know as much. But we know better. Says that Rebbe, the Beinani, you who knows better, you should be held at the highest standard. And that's why this makes the person understand that he is really not in the level of even the lowest of the low. He's lower than them. That leads the Beinani to break his heart. When his heart is broken, it doesn't make his self-esteem smaller, but it breaks his evil side, and that brings out the Kiddush, the holy side, the Nefesh Elokis is overcoming, and he will be able to continue to serve Hashem b'simcha v'tuv levov, with happiness and joy. So this is the end of chapter 30, the end of today's shir. Thank you so much for joining, and join us tomorrow again, 9 o'clock. Any questions?